Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 420 and 421, which will cover just one chapter, manga chapter 524, where we find out what happened to the remaining half of the Straw Hat crew after they were sent away by Kuma. And additionally, at the end, I will also be giving my overall thoughts and short review on the Amazon Lily arc. Alrighty, so synopsis. We get to see what became of the remaining 4 Straw Hats that weren't explored in the last few episodes. We learn where Robin, Usopp, Zoro, and Brook all ended up and what they're up to since their encounter with Kuma. Alright, so differences. There are, I guess, a few differences. So while Usopp and Brook's stories play out largely the same, Zoro and Robin's stories are expanded on much more. So Robin, pretty much the entire subplot with that little girl Soran and the ladies that were working in that little house, that was all added in the manga. And in the manga, it actually just starts off with her already being captured and talking to the warden inside his office as they look upon the bridge being built. And then similarly with Zoro, pretty much everything after he wakes up, after Perona treats and bandages him, was all added. So all that stuff where he's trying to leave and she's messing with him, all that stuff is added in the anime. And then I guess one minor addition that the anime added in that sort of that montage of all the Marine people being let into Marineford, there is a unusual shot of Vice Admiral Tsuru also added in the anime, whereas in the manga she was not actually highlighted. Alright, so let's get into my thoughts on these 2 episodes. So starting off this episode with Hancock getting extremely jealous of Nami and Robin, who she's yet to even meet, is pretty hilarious. I love how that episode starts off. It's also hilarious how Hancock thinks so highly of Luffy and sees him as this player type person, but obviously that couldn't be further from the truth. And then the other thing I also love is how as the episodes kind of roll on, more and more soldiers are petrified, and you can see them stacked in front of the door as they constantly try and spy on Hancock and Luffy. It's like by episode, what is it? The second episode of the pair, you see like almost 8 or 9 of them stacked by the door, which is pretty funny. So getting back to catching up with the Straw Hats, the next Straw Hat we actually get to meet again is Robin, who has also been sent to some sort of winter island like Frankie, but this one is called Tequila Wolf, which is an interesting name. It happens to be in the East Blue where our adventure started, which is kind of shocking because this is the first we learn that Robin isn't even in the Grand Line anymore, so this brings up a lot of questions for me, like how the heck is she going to get back to the crew, who are essentially halfway across the Grand Line already, and can she even get back in the Grand Line by herself, without a ship with sea stone, or is she going to have to make it all the way back somehow? But anyways, moving on with the story though, she's found by a little girl named Soran, who offers to help her, but this island looks incredibly bleak, where these people seem to be oppressed and forced into some sort of manual labor, creating a bridge to who knows where for hundreds of years apparently. And you really feel for Soran being so young, being forced to work all her life, but still has so much positivity and optimism to one day go out to see the outside world and to visit all the islands that she's drawn from her imagination alone. And yeah, I mean, she's definitely got that sort of the One Piece spirit for sure of dreams and trying to do the impossible. And yeah, the warm emotions evoked in just that short scene of Soran and the others getting enthralled by Robin's stories was really touching, but it was also very short-lived due to that one lady that, that was against Robin's arrival. She ratted everyone out, and the ladies actually do everything they can, even Soran sacrificing her precious treasure, her drawings, to protect Robin. And yeah, that's how you know who the good people or the heroes are in One Piece. They're willing to put their dreams and treasures on the line to protect what's actually important. And Soran and these ladies, what they're made of, it was incredible to see how long, despite how hopeless the situation they weren't in themselves, how they just stood up to these guys. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that They may be stuck there, but they also had so much empathy and courage that they didn't want to see Robin suffer that same fate that they were stuck in, almost hoping that by saving her and that they would be able to live vicariously through her. However, Robin, obviously being the good person she is herself, decides to turn herself in, but not before teaching a few of them a lesson and taking out like 8 of them single-handedly. I guess she uses like 6 hands, but you know what I mean. Um, she then gets captured and enslaved like everyone else, forced to build the bridge, which apparently has been under construction for 700 years. Like, how freaking long is this bridge and where is it going? This is honestly a mystery that we still actually don't know the answer to, like even as of chapter 1090, where I'm at in the story. And at first I was wondering how this island would relate to Robin, but after hearing that number, the 700 years, it started to dawn on me at the time that perhaps there is something related to the Boyd Century here, or the world government, as the bridge started construction relatively soon after the Void Century ends and the establishment of the world government begins. The Void Century occurred 800 years ago, and then you have about 100 years, and then the bridge starts getting constructed. So sometime during this period, this bridge began being built for whatever purpose, and it can't be a coincidence that these two things are related, and Robin is here on this island. But you just feel bad for Robin, though. Like, what is going through her head right now? It wasn't that long ago she was in captivity by the world government and saved by the Straw Hats, and now by pure chance she ends up being captured by them yet again. Although this time, it seems like these people are completely unaware of Robin's actual value and her notoriety, which is a good thing, because she's basically just being treated like a normal prisoner as opposed to a high-value target that the world government desperately wants to get their hands on. Moving on from Robin, we turn our attention to Usopp, who finds himself in a jungle island, kind of similar to Chopper, but instead of giant birds, it's filled with massive bugs and man-eating plants. Luckily for Usopp, he's saved by a guy in a beetle armor named Heracles, and it's not quite as apparent why Usopp may have been sent here, but the giant bugs and Heracles may be some kind of clue, as Heracles in Greek mythology is the Latin-rooted name for the English named Hercules, which refers to the Hercules beetle, the same kind that Usopp and Luffy always go nuts for, and also the Hercules beetle in Japanese is called the kabutomushi. And of course, Usopp's main current weapon, that staff slingshot that he uses, is called the kabuto. So there's this very roundabout way that these are all connected. So maybe Usopp will incorporate more bug-based attacks or tricks while being on this island into his arsenal. But that's all we really get for Usopp's story. And thus, we move on to the next Straw Hat. Except before that, we get the surprise reveal of what actually happened to Perona, of all people. And I'll be honest, when I was reading this part of the story, I completely forgot about her being another person that was sent away by Kuma without really any follow-up or explanation. And she seems to be on some sort of Nightmare Before Christmas-like island, complete with the spooky castle and those like little pointed, curly mountaintops. And it's not long before we do get to see the next member, which happens to be a heavily wounded Zoro who appears on this same island. And this whole sequence took an interesting turn, as you'd think Perona would want revenge on Zoro, but shockingly she takes him in and treats him. And we ultimately find out she did this more for selfish reasons, more so than benevolent ones, as she's been very lonely being all alone inside this massive castle on this island by herself. And it kind of really humanizes Perona, actually. And, like we talked about in the past podcasts during the Thriller Bark arc, she was probably one of the few Moria pirate members that weren't nearly as bad as the others, I'd say. But yeah, I honestly had no idea what Zoro was going to gain by being here. And yeah, to cap this story off, I do like the transition of Zoro screaming into his commercial eye catcher, because it's of him opening his mouth wide open and yawning, but it actually looks like he's still screaming, which that was no doubt very much intentional by the director, which I thought was a great touch. Then lastly, we get to follow up on Brooke, who is on sort of an impoverished island called Harahetanya. And a translator's note here. So Haraheta literally means my stomach is empty, or a phrase often used to say that you're very hungry. If you've paid attention to Luffy, he's said this 100 times like throughout this series, practically yelling it at Sanji all the time. And so yeah, that's where that name comes from. And this one has to be the strangest island yet, as we immediately get thrown into some cult ritual, and coincidentally, Brooke lands right on their ritual site during the ritual. A living skeleton just happens to resurrect in front of them. It builds all this tension up only to unleash another panty joke. But at least this one had a funny twist in that it wasn't the women that showed him, but it was all the other men who were like obsessed with this ritual, thinking they had to show it to him. And similarly with Brooke, I had no idea what he was going to gain from this island, aside from maybe working with these people to help them in some way with whatever hardship they were dealing with, and maybe learning something from their ritualistic cult thing. But yeah, this one was very short and not too much to really like analyze, I guess. So yeah, definitely Zoro, Brooke. I didn't really see too many like sort of commonalities, at least associated at the moment. But yeah, I mean, now that we know where each one of them went, of course, with all the Straw Hats being spared and spread across the planet, several questions kind of began to take shape for me, at least at the time. And first off is why? Like, why did Kuma spare them? And is he in fact a good guy? Because that's now twice he's basically spared them and even saved the Straw Hats, once on Thriller Bark and now on Sabodi. And of course, we don't know to what end and what kind of relationship he has to the Straw Hats. All we know is before saving them, he whispered something to Rayleigh, and Rayleigh asked if he could really trust him. So clearly he's working either of his own volition or in tandem with someone else. But we have no idea who this is or why he's doing this, or at least I had no idea. And then the second set of questions that surrounds this is the locations he sent each of them. Because on the surface, it seems like he sent each one to a specific place deliberately with the intention to support them, as each place seems to have something that could help each Straw Hat. However, that begs the question, how does he know so much about each Straw Hat and what would what would be most beneficial to each of them? Like, these questions were definitely something I honestly had no idea what the answers were, because I firmly believe that there was information missing at this point. But what became clear to me was Kuma was some sort of a double agent of some kind, or kind of like a Hancock, not, a Shibukai, but that's not really outright antagonistic towards the Strong Hats. And this story thread was really interesting to follow throughout this whole thing, throughout the whole Summit War arc, or saga, I should say, until it was finally revealed what actually happened. And to be quite honest, without spoiling it, there are still aspects about this whole thing that are still kind of a mystery, to me at least, as of this day, even to the release of Chapter 1090. To finish off this episode, we get back to the main story with a rather funny scene of Hancock again trying to pass off Luffy's sort of boisterous behavior as her own. But the best part about that whole scene is how one of the Marines doubts that Hancock was the one that yelled, "Bah, I'm stuffed," and bets that if she did, he'd go get a mohawk. But then when she does come out and say it, during their shocked reactions, it transitions all of their hair to mohawks. And I honestly missed this joke the first time. And I only noticed it upon a second reread of the manga. And then I went back and had to watch the anime. When this originally happened, I was like, wait a second, their hair turned into mohawks. And it took me a few tries to actually see this joke. And in the final scenes, we see all the famous Marines that we've encountered up till now gather at Marineford. Some who we haven't seen in a while, like Smoker, Tashigi, Hina, along with Django and Full Body, as well as the two admirals we've met so far, Kizaru and Aokiji. But interestingly, Oda is still keeping Akainu hidden. And I think Oda was maybe trying to trick us by having that giant Marine Vice Admiral walk before the other two. because he's like dressed up in red with kind of his face a little bit obscured, and he's shown just before Kizaru and Aokiji. But we all know, I mean, if you've been paying attention, we all know that what Akainu kind of looks like from his brief appearance in Robin's flashback, and so that clearly isn't him, and we have yet to actually meet Akainu or Sakazuki. Then we get the money shot of the Shibukai, and man, this was freaking epic when I first saw it. I remember how in awe I was of this panel because, you know, the Shibukai to this point in the story, like, I mean, where people are in the manga or even in the anime right now, the Shibukai have kind of lost a little bit of their allure because more powerful enemies have appeared. But at this point, the Shibukai were considered to be like some of the pinnacle of the One Piece villain or rogues gallery, you know? Like, these guys were bigger than life, and they were some of the most fearsome pirates up to this point in the series, all gathered around a table. But what really stands out about this shot is just how massive they all are. Like, I'm not sure why, but it's not until here at the time when I really was like, geez, these guys are huge. Like, you see them all seated at the table and you compare them to the normal Marine officers or like Mihawk sitting around them. And then you get to Kuma and Moria sitting to their left, and they're like the size of buildings. And not only that, but Blackbeard and Doflamingo are also not tiny either. And while not as large as Kuma and Moria, they still dwarf a normal human easily. And yeah, I just remember thinking, like, this is really cool, but also insane that you have all this Shibukai, at least most of them, minus Hancock and Jinbei, all sitting around a table like that. It's just crazy how much, like, power and sort of evil that's kind of gathered right there. And it really starts to hit you just how crazy and massive this story is going to get as we get closer to the war. And then we end off with an intimate scene with Garp and Ace finally speaking, and Ace requesting to be killed in order to stop Whitebeard from coming after him. But Garp assures him that no matter what, Whitebeard is coming. Which, yeah, of course he's coming either way, whether it's to save Ace or if Ace is dead, to avenge him. This is definitely building up to something incredibly gigantic in scale, with all the different players converging in one massive conflict. And one thing I really sort of, going back and looking at this, I really sort of appreciate how all this stuff kind of happens without Luffy or the Straw Hats. Like, this, Luffy and the Straw Hats are kind of on their own adventure. I know Luffy is on his way to try and save Ace, but there is this, like, massive conflict happening without your main characters, essentially. And it's really a testament to Oda's world building and character building that he's done up till now, that he can have a conflict like this where it pretty much doesn't need the main characters, and you're still on the edge of your seat because all these other characters and the world and the situation around them have been built up so well that you don't even care about what the other Straw Hats are doing, because you're way more interested in this war and coming conflict that's going to happen between the Whitebeard pirates and the Marines. Like, it's insane. And trust me, it lives up to it too. But yeah, so that's where these episodes end. So next, we're going to finish off this podcast with a short review of Amazon Lily, since the Amazon Lily arc basically ends at this point. So, some of you might wonder, with Amazon Lily being only 14 episodes long, does it really even warrant an arc review? But I think enough happened, as well as new things introduced and explored, that it does warrant being talked about. Also, it gives me an excuse to time it so that I can start the Impel Down arc on a clean episode. So there is that as well. So, as you might have guessed, based on the past few podcast episodes, I really enjoy this arc. It does a lot for the limited number of episodes it consists of, from introducing several new characters, including a new Shichibukai member, a whole new island and culture, expanding upon and exploring Haki, as well as fleshing out the concept of specifically Conqueror's Haki, just to name a few things. And this arc also does a few unique things to the series up to this point, and deviates from the established formula to keep the series fresh by, first off, separating and having Luffy on his own for the first time since the beginning of the series, outside of when he gets temporarily lost or separated, like in Skypiea or Thriller Bark. But this is the first time he's completely on his own, and we don't even get cutaways to see how the crew is doing until the very end. And even then, they're pretty much now off on their own adventures. It's quite unfamiliar territory and creates this sense of uneasiness as immediately it becomes apparent that Luffy needs them, whether it be Frankie's ability to build stuff, Chopper's medical knowledge, Nami's navigational skills, Sanji's cooking, etc. It's almost like I felt like I lost like my safety blanket, and without them you kind of feel a little bit more vulnerable, even as the reader. And I think this series handles this really well, actually, because first off, Luffy himself is an interesting character all on his own. And it's a testament, again, to Oda's strength of character development and writing to be able to have Luffy just stand on his own for the most part. Obviously, he lets Luffy play off of a few of the new characters, mainly Margaret and Hancock, which he's got great chemistry with. It also really builds up Luffy even more, showing us parts of Luffy that are completely new to us or reinforcing what we already love about him to another degree. Seeing his sort of seemingly asexual nature when it comes to women or his newfound level of power in his conqueror's haki, it was all pretty entertaining to kind of discover all these new parts of Luffy. Another twist or change that this arc throws at you to keep you on your toes is the fact that the Shichibukai becomes an ally. At first, she comes off very antagonistic, but it isn't an outright villain like all the other Shichibukai we've met so far. You could argue Mihawk wasn't a villain either, but he doesn't really become an ally either. However, not only do we get the twist that Hancock is not a villain, but that she falls madly in love with Luffy, which was something I thought I'd never see in One Piece, given Oda's adamant policy to not have much romance in the story. And I personally really liked how Oda handled Luffy and Hancock's sort of friendship/relationship. He sets everything up really well by relating Hancock's slow warming up to Luffy because of his responses to Hancock and her actions. Like I mentioned in the previous podcast episodes, by looking at the actions Luffy took and relating them back to what Hancock had gone through in her past and what was really important to her, you really understand why Hancock grows to respect and love Luffy. Another thing I thought was really interesting about this arc, as well as going back to the previous arc Sabodi, is just how much more mature the themes that Oda start to introduce are. He began with slavery, racism, and human trafficking in Sabodi. Now in Amazon Lily, he's introducing even darker themes with sex trafficking and even doubling down with the concept of slavery through the Celestial Dragons, as well as implying, but not explicitly stating, a lot more, even more darker stuff. And it also explores sort of the oppression of women and the marginalization of them. While it can be tough to grapple with some of these concepts, especially in a shonen series, but I think Oda has basically waited till his audience has matured a bit to sort of introduce these, and I think it was at the right time. As the story ramps up, the stakes, it demonstrates that while this is a fun adventure, the world is still a very scary and dangerous place. And I like that sort of growth in both Oda as a writer and the story. And on that note, this arc also takes another step, like pretty much every other arc, to expand and develop the world of One Piece even further. We learn even more about the vile nature of the Celestial Dragons, as well as how the fish people and the slavery aspect, they all mix together, as well as how people are enslaved. We see the total power structure of the Marines and how they operate as they prepare for the impending war versus the Whitebeard pirates. And this is especially eye-opening, sort of the scale of the power that a Yonko pirate wields. When you see the entire Marine organization collectively shitting their pants and working to recall all of their forces back, including the admirals and the Shichibukai, you know something is up with the Yonko. And up till now, we've really only seen brief glimpses of Shanks and Whitebeard. But you kind of get the sense that, yes, these guys were powerful, especially during their sort of brief meeting earlier on. But you don't really get a sense of just how powerful. But now that you're seeing this response from the Marines, you really start to think, like, this is big. Like, a Yonko pirate is really strong or just incredibly powerful in terms of their fleet, and it was pretty eye-opening at the time, I remember. If I had one criticism about this arc, it would be that it doesn't quite take the time to really explore or flesh out the culture of Amazon Lily as much, and it kind of lets the narrator explain their way of life, and with just a couple lines of dialogue, we don't really get to see much of the island or its people, and Oda just kind of almost exclusively lets the narrator explain every aspect of the society, like their warrior culture or how the Kuja pirates work and other day-to-day aspects of the island. Like, it would have been cool to see a bit more about how their society works, especially how they develop the kids into warrior women, and more about how they get to quote-unquote reproduce to introduce more girls to the island. I did love seeing how they all reacted to seeing what seemed like their first man that they've ever experienced in Luffy. For most of them, at least for the ones that don't go outside who are part of the Kuja pirates. But yeah, it does seem like more it's a tell don't show type of storytelling for Oda. But I think maybe he didn't necessarily want to linger too much on Amazon Lily and wanted to get the story going as much as possible, because obviously the Impel Down and Marineford are the sort of the highlight of this saga. And of course, this arc had some incredible, memorable moments. I won't get into too much detail since I've already explored these in more detail throughout the podcast. But obviously, a few highlights I wanted to mention were, Luffy sacrificing himself to save Margaret, Aphalandra, and Sweet Pea. Also, his unleashing of Conqueror's Haki for the first time and just making people in the arena pass out. That was really cool. Also, while this isn't cool, it was really eye-opening to see Hancock's past and how her and Luffy sort of react to that, and just seeing their sort of dynamic grow. All of that was really well done, I think, in this arc. And so yeah, I think this Amazon Lily arc, while very short, it is still very memorable, in terms of a small arc that sets things up for an incredible conflict with Luffy trying to save Ace, while the Whitebeard pirates close in on Marineford for an all-out war to save Ace as well. And so, yeah, we'll be starting the new arc, Impel Down, which I seriously can't wait to discuss, because holy moly, so much crazy stuff happens in this coming arc, and I can't wait. Anyways, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and X or Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes, or see some pictures of my manga collection. Check those out. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. Small spoiler section, just kind of highlight some of the things that get set up later on. But if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so spoiler section. This is going to be mostly unscripted. But yeah, I think the thing that I kind of wanted to mention was the Straw Hats and how their stories unfold. I remember when this first came out, I was genuinely confused as to like where the story was going, because they were all separated all over the world, and I honestly could not figure out how they were going to get back together or when they would get back together, to be honest, because this side story was long. And it got longer and longer as it progressed. You had Impel Down, and then you had the Marineford arc, and then you had post Marineford after that, and then you finally start to get to see what happened. And you got a little, a couple breadcrumbs here and there with the cover stories that sort of outlined each one of their stories. I think each one of them got like one or two or three covers per Strong Hat to kind of make a cover story sequence. And this is one of the few cover stories that actually does get animated. And so this was used not necessarily as filler, but I like that they used the material to actually enhance that, because it is important to see what the Straw Hats are up to and what they do. I was actually kind of surprised that Oda included that such an important part of the story in the cover stories, and rather not in the main manga story. It's very interesting how he chose to do that. I mean, it's all so piecemeal too. Like you get the cover stories, and then it's not till the end of the Summit War arc that you actually get to see what the others are doing, especially when they learn that Ace has died and that Luffy was there and unable to do anything. And obviously that moment where each one of them learns that yeah, Luffy failed to save Ace and how hurt he must be, and how I love that moment, where they all buckle down and decide that they need to become stronger for him, culminating in sort of that general arc that I was talking about in Thriller Bark and Long Ring Longland, where Luffy, it sets him up to experience all these failures, and because of his lack of power and leadership. And then similarly, the Strong Hats in Thriller Bark start to realize that they can't always depend on Luffy. Luffy is going to need them. And I love that culmination with the Straw Hats all kind of being missing and getting to train a little bit. And then you obviously have the famous 2D 3Y, or 3D 2Y message, and then you get the time skip. And so yeah, this was pretty crazy at the time. I remember thinking like, wow, this is really really planned out. At least this part of it was. I know there are some aspects of it that weren't planned out, but the fact that Oda essentially started this massive arc in terms of separating the Straw Hats, going through all of this, and then bringing them back together for the post-time skip era is pretty interesting, and was really shocking to see. I remember being pretty thrown off by the idea of a time skip in One Piece, and yeah, it was pretty crazy at the time. Of course, yeah, there's a bunch of other things that I could talk about in the spoiler section. The Shibukai, man, they live up to their billing. I was not disappointed with the Shibukai, and Jinbei obviously is awesome. And which was a surprise too, that he was also he turned out to be a good guy. Not only a good guy, but a future Straw Hat. I did not see that one coming, and obviously we'll talk more about Jinbei when he gets introduced in actually probably a few episodes, maybe like a dozen episodes from now, is what I think when Jinbei will first get introduced. But yeah, I can't wait to talk about Impel Downs. Like, Impel Downs is so fun, not only with all the returning old characters, and then obviously the new characters as well. Ivankov, obviously Buggy, Mr. 3, Galdino, Mr. 1, Des Bonus, Crocodile. God, that arc is so damn fun. And yeah, I can't wait to talk about Impel Downs. Anyways, that's kind of all I really wanted to talk about. So yeah, thanks for hanging around, and see you on the next episode. See ya.